Welcome. Today we are replacing the outer tie rod ends on the X. So I already did the left one and I'm going to demonstrate on the right side. Now it's the same process on both sides, and why am I doing this? Well, I have a little bit of vagueness in my steering. So in the center, when you're driving down the road, there's a little bit of space. When you go to the left or right, it feels relatively tight, but when it's in the center, just kind of cruising, it moves a little too much. So that could point to the inner tie rods or the outer, or technically the steering box. So there's a lot of different things it could be, but the outer tie rods are cheap to replace and easy to replace. So it's always good to just start there, replace them, and if it helps your problem, that's awesome. If not, it was something that really should have been done anyways if you have a vehicle with really high mileage. So just like everything else on the Nissan, it hasn't been replaced. It's never been replaced. So at 130,000 miles, just do it anyways, and you have peace of mind. So I already have the Nissan lifted. If you need help lifting or need instruction on lifting, just click on the link over my head, and you will see a little card there to show you how to lift the Nissan. And also, I have a power tool, air impact, well, I guess electric impact. But if you don't, make sure that you loosen your lug nuts prior to lifting the Nissan. So let's get this tire off and get started on replacing that tie rod end. Now we are on the passenger side, and the first thing you're going to want to do when you get into here and see your tie rod end is you want to hit it with some penetrating fluid or some sort of lubricant. These lock nuts on the back end into the inner tie rod are very, very tight, for me at least. So if yours had not been done in a long time or never been done, then yours will also be really tough to get to. So go ahead and just hit that real quick with some penetrating fluid. All right, good. And obviously be very careful not to get any on your brake disc. Brakes obviously rely on friction to stop, and lubrication is the enemy of friction. So let that sit for a little while, and then what we're going to do is we're going to break this nut, and so that why it's all still attached and it's still nice and tight, and then we're going to take off the ball joint itself and then pop it off and redo it all. All right, it's been sitting for a few minutes. So how we're going to handle this lock nut is that it's just like everything else. It's, left is loose, right is tight. So, but we're looking at it, right? We're looking at it on its bolt. So it's actually going to be, the opposite for us. So for it to go left, it's going to be this rotation. So right on our side. So we're going to pull this down. So this rotation, and when this comes off, this is going to rotate left. So start by taking off the lock nut, and then this will kind of loosen itself, and then you can go in and do this here. But before we do any of that, what we're going to want to do is mark our position. All right, just in case, because obviously, at the end of the day, if you don't do any damage to it, you can keep this lock nut and use it for your next tie rod end. It's really no big deal. But so that kind of automatically tells us where the other tie rod end should be, right? Because it's going to meet up right here. However, in loosening this and taking this off, you're going to need little gaps. So what we're going to do is we're going to take an opaque paint pen and just do a few little marks where the treads meet the nut on the back side of it. So grab a paint pen for that. Just put a few little marks in and mark the nut and the threads in like maybe 3 different locations, so that way you know exactly where that nut went. If you're not looking to do a alignment after this, then it's absolutely imperative that you make sure that these are on the same exact way or the amount that they were before, right? So there's a lot of different methods. I'm going to use the paint pen. There's another method that some people like to use is once they have this off of the actual steering assembly, is they will count the rotations of the turns. I don't like that. I don't know, I guess I just don't like counting. So I'm going to use the paint pen, get some marks on here, and then we're going to take this nut off. Okay, so I just did 3 little dots, one on the top, one about 10 or 15 degrees over, and then one about 60 to 70 degrees over. So once that's done, get some torque on it, and make sure you're always pulling towards yourself. You're not hitting any obstructions, because this one is on pretty darn tight, so you're going to have to put some real juice into it. Woo! All right. So now that it's loose, just give a little tiny bit of space between the tie rod end and the lock nut. That's going to allow us to turn this off of the inner tie rod, and but still keeping the nut very close to where it was before. So theoretically, with the nut being where it is right now, we should be able to get this tie rod end all the way in and get this pointing up without having to move this. It may not be 100% perfect, won't be the end of the world. We'll know if we're 1 or 2 threads off based on our paint marks, which is why we did it. So next we're going to take this off, slide this out, and then put the new one on. To remove this top nut, you just have to remove this little cotter pin, and then this should pop right off. So you may or may not need penetrating fluid for this. In fact, I might as well just do it anyways, just to make sure that while we're working with this cotter pin, it will slide out a little easier, and we won't have to struggle so much. So let that soak in, and again, protect your brake pad, or excuse me, your brake disc. And then take some needle nose pliers, straighten out your pin. Right. There we go. Okay, so now that that's off, grab your just regular wrench, grab this big guy here, and loosen this. All right, easy enough. And now unscrew it. Now there's a few ways to do this. There's a tool, of course, that Nissan sells that's Nissan branded called like the ball joint remover or whatever that you would use to take this off. I have a good old-fashioned pickle fork. Now, pickle forks are handy because they can be used for a lot of different things, and they work for just about all different ball joints of obviously any sizes, smaller than that. So the way I'm going to do it is I just slide it in here, slide it on top of the dust boot, and in between that and the actual bracket that it attaches to. And this is going to allow us to pop this off. So there we go. Once you get it in, these are tapered, all right? So once you get it in, you just kind of keep pushing and kind of jiggling until it gets in there. Now, one thing to be careful of is you got some lines here, right, that run behind this. Now you can put this in pretty far before that becomes a problem, but just be careful behind where you're working, to the sides of where you're working, that you're not doing any damage to any lines or any shields, any parts of the braking, obviously, that you don't want to hurt any of it. So just keep working it in until it gets bigger, and then wiggle it some more. All right. And then I'm just going to take a little dead blow, get it in a little further. All right. Keep wiggling. Woo! All right. So mine was jammed pretty well in there. So, you may have to get pretty crazy on it. I just had to wallop it pretty darn good with a regular hammer. So not the ideal situation, but if you can't get it off, then you have to find out a way, right? So in all of that, you want to make sure that this hasn't been jarred around. So kind of make sure that's nice and flush with your tie rod end. And now that this is out, we can kind of, well, first of all, we can play with it. It's a little too loose, but you can start to screw this off, but make sure you're not touching this nut, all right? So start taking it off here. Now these go in pretty deep, so just kind of keep going, make sure you're not touching that nut. All right, there we go. So now we want to go get our new one, make sure it's the right size, that it looks right, and then we're going to put it back together. All you need to do when looking at the old and new tie rod ends is make sure that they're the same size, obviously the same shape, that all of the bends are in the right places. You know, you never know. Things could happen and they could send you the wrong part, or, you know, there could be some sort of manufacturing defect. So really just make sure that they look the same shape, same size, and if they are, then you're good to go. So we have our new one next to our old one, and they both look good. So let's get started on replacing it and getting the new one put on. All right, here we go. Now, here's our new one. Here's our new part. This just has a nut with a nylon lock in it. Not a huge fan of that. I feel a little bit better about the cotter pin, but if you get them nice and tight, they shouldn't back out. You shouldn't really have an issue. So all we have to do now is screw this one back in. So here's our the extension for our inner. Start screwing it in. Just be super careful not to cross thread this or damage the threads in any way. You really don't want to have to deal with that. So, and again, not touching this nut. You don't want to back this out or move it closer. So just keep going. And once we get close, what we're going to do, here we go, getting pretty close. So what we're going to do is make sure that all of our points line up again. All right. That looks good on our lock nut. So that way we know that the lock nut is where it should be, and when this stops spinning, then we're done, right? So there we go. Now, so the lock nut, oh, sorry, let me redo that here. Didn't do that the way I wanted to. There's the 3 points. So it's right there, yep. So you want it pointing up, and with the points on the nut aligned, so the points that you created. So we have that. Perfect. And then you just got to push this in to our new slot here. There we go. Once that's in, just get this nut on. You don't have to tighten it right now. Just get it on here. There we go. And what that's going to do is allow us to tighten this nut without spinning the inner tie rod and just having it kind of turn. So get this one tight. Okay. All right, good. It's nice and tight. And now just tighten this. Okay, once it's nice and tight, make sure this is good. Make sure this one's good, which it should be. Let me just double check. All right, good. And really that's it. So you want to go ahead and we can actually just realign this one so it doesn't look so weird. There we go. All right, that's it. So once this is tight and you're sure that it's tight, once this is tight, you know, really the last thing to do is, since you have everything off, you know, look at all the links down here. Make sure everything's good. Look at your upper ball joint, your lower ball joint. You have this is your sway bar link. You have a lot of stuff under here that you can look at and inspect and see if anything needs to get done. So everything down here looks pretty good. I'm probably gonna end up doing my sway bar link and probably my upper ball joint at some point, but right now there's nothing in dire need, so I am going to put everything back together. So that's it. It's really a pretty straightforward job. Really the only note on this job is just really show caution when you're working behind the front wheels. You're working around systems that are really arguably the most important parts of the car, right? Your braking and your steering. If you lose one or both of those things, you're really in a world of hurt. So just be careful not to pinch any hoses, not to, you know, break or bend any parts that are down there while you're working. And if you do that, then you should be just fine. So as always, thanks for watching, and any comments, questions, and suggestions in the comments below. Thanks, bye.